Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Welcome. The reading that you just heard was not the gospel that one would normally read on a Sunday throughout the year. In fact, each Sunday up until now, the sermon has been from one of the Gospels. And at this time, it's been from Luke. However, if you noticed, the last several of those Sundays, there was another reading, the first reading, which was from the book of Hebrews. And that's also a reading for today. So I chose to reflect a little bit on this particularly unique book of the New Testament. Why do I say unique? Because if you're a translator, you have to ask several questions as you start translating a work, whether it's a document of this kind or that kind or the other. In this case, a book of the New Testament. And you very quickly find out that you know very little about this particular book. You might ask sort of three questions. What is it? What is the document? You might ask, who wrote it? And you might ask, to whom was it written? Knowing this would give you kind of an idea of the background, the thinking that should go into this item that you're going to translate. So, Hebrews is often called a letter to the Hebrews. But it didn't start out like a letter. We have all the other examples to Colossians and Philippians and all these, written by Paul and James and various people. This one doesn't start out like a letter at all. It starts out almost like a sermon, like a presentation, formal oration. But it ends like a letter. So is it a letter or isn't it? Who wrote it? Well, the early church wanted to think maybe it was the Apostle Paul. And even Martin Luther thought for a while it was Paul. But if you look closely at the text of Hebrews, Paul was not of a capacity to write that kind of document. It's so special. So maybe people think that it might have been written by Paulus, who was a Jewish Christian from Alexandria, that's North Africa, Greek territory. He was a specialist, he was a preacher. He's known in the New Testament, but Paul knew him in Corinth. He was known with Priscilla and Aquila. He was a skilled Greek rhetorician or speaker in Greek. He was a brilliant scholar, and he knew the Old Testament, that is the Torah and the prophets, very, very well. And so he based a lot of his discussion through Hebrews on quotations or texts from the Old Testament. It might have been him, but it might not. So it's really a book that we don't know by whom it was written. We don't know exactly what it is. And we don't know to whom it was written. It says the Hebrews. Okay, the Hebrews. Who and where and when? In Rome or in the East? Or was he writing from one side or from the other side? He was seemingly writing to a young church. The young church that was very discouraged, broken apart at the time, and he was trying to encourage them and to uplift them. And what he calls it himself in the letter to the Hebrews at the end, he calls it a word of exhortation. It might have been a keynote lecture, a keynote speech at one of the earliest church synods, a council meeting. He might have been the theologian who was called to set the stage for the life of the church in the future. You could look at Hebrews in that way. So today I'd like to look a little bit at the text, the verses that we just read. That could be really a summary or conclusion of the author's main message. It's a message to a community, to a group of people. And as we started reading, if you start thinking about what you read and you have it in your hands in front of you, he's addressing people directly. You. You have not come to something, you who are gathered here, you have not come to something that can be touched. A blazing fire, darkness, gloom and a tempest, the sound of a trumpet, and a voice whose words made the hearers beg not to hear another word spoken to them. They could not endure the order that was given. If even an animal touches the mountain, it shall be stoned to death. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses, their leader, said, I trembled with fear. What is this story? This is the story of the Israelites leaving captivity in Egypt and coming now to face God at Mount Sinai. This was their story that they had lived, that they had been told throughout centuries up until now, when this writer was reminding them of their history. Does he embellish it? Does he exaggerate? Think back on what that real Mount Sinai experience must have been. And when Moses went up on top of the mountain and came back and he found them worshiping what? A golden calf. That's when Moses actually said he was terrified, he was trembling with fear, because how could he respond to God? What could he do with those 10 commandments? What could he do with God's presence that they were experiencing there at the foot of Mount Sinai? The psalm that we just read summarizes this just in 2 lines. It says, he made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel. It sounds very simple and clear and poetic there, but that's what even the psalmist was referring to in talking about God's ways and revealing them to his people. So what does he turn around and draw their attention to now? He says, but you, his audience to whom he's speaking, to whom he was writing, you have come to Mount Sinai and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. This could be the whole expression of faith of that community at that time. And he's putting it in all these spiritual terms: Mount Zion, the living God, and the heavenly Jerusalem. We talk about the prophets speaking from the Old Testament, and yet here in the New Testament, it's a new covenant, and it's no longer Abel's blood that was spilled, but now Christ's blood that was spilled for them. What does this amount to? What is he telling them? Not only for the Hebrews then, but for us today, our church, our young church, our church today here. He's talking about God's presence in the church among us. He's talking about the good community of those who are together and of those who have passed on before. He's talking about the departed saints. He's talking and reminding us that God is the God of justice, and He's still our God today. He's reminding us of all the benefits of God's work in Christ of redemption for us. And he sums it up then by saying, you are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. What kingdom is he talking about? He's talking about the kingdom that Jesus was proclaiming in the Gospels. That Jesus was talking about the kingdom in Matthew and Mark and Luke and even in John. And here, the writer here is drawing their attention to your kingdom, our kingdom, this kingdom now that cannot be shaken. Haggai talked to prophets in the Old Testament about the kingdom being shaken. He says, your kingdom will not be shaken. The kingdom that's present now. God is reigning now. The community of Hebrews then, the young church, and we, the church today, are receiving, we're part of that unshakable kingdom. It's now ours. But there's a warning. Don't refuse the voice that's speaking to you. Don't refuse and do as the Israelites did then, and did so often over their history, turning away, hearing and turning away, not listening to the voice, or listening but not hearing, of Israel refusing to listen, turning away time and again. Therefore, he concludes, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, we are invited to give thanks, by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe. He doesn't define acceptable worship. Maybe he was thinking of the first reading that we read just a little while ago from Isaiah. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs. He goes all over the place for his congregation then and now. Then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth, the heavenly Jerusalem, Zion, going on and on. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This is our call, I think, to be a community of the Sabbath, a community of worship. Remember, as he referred to Moses in Mount Sinai, there was one commandment among the other 10. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Then a stunning warning, or is it a promise? The last word of this section in his letter, before he goes into the 13th chapter, but there were no sections and verses and chapters then. This was sort of the ending of that section. He says, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. Fire was referred to in the Old Testament. Fire was referred to on Mount Sinai. And now here he's telling his people that are gathered, that he's trying to encourage, to uplift, to carry forward the faith today. He says, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. That word consuming is a whole big problem. And if you look at the original word, if you look at the different translations, the one that we read said a consuming fire. Some say a devouring fire. Some say a destructive fire. But what does fire do? It burns, it consumes, it purifies, it cleanses, and it destroys. So, do we have a refining fire? One of the translations, the Cotton Patch translation, says a refining fire. And I like that one. God is our refining fire. Or another translation says, short and simple, God himself is fire. God still is our God, the God of the Israelites at Mount Sinai. So let us remember our author's exhortation. Whoever he was, whenever he said it, however he wrote or said it, or to whom, let us, as this community of faith, give thanks and offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe.